Tonight on Primetime Politics, raising an alarm.
These monsters are a front for another terrorist group.
The Conservative leader wants Houthi rebels in Yemen recognized as a terrorist entity, criticizing the federal Liberals for failing to do what Washington did back in January. Coming up, we'll hear more from Pierre Poilievre and get reaction from our political strategist to what he had to say about the Liberal track record on security. Also, Election Day in the U.S. is just 25 days away, and Emerson College polling has some new numbers out. We will speak to the senior director of that center to get some insights. Plus,
we cannot be the country we should be if we're living on a lie.
Recognizing Indigenous peoples as founders of this country. We'll speak to former Foreign Affairs Minister Lloyd Axworthy about his thoughts on reopening and revising the Constitution. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The Conservative leader is calling out the Trudeau government, criticizing them for failing to add the Houthis in Yemen to Canada's list of terrorist organizations. Now, that designation is more than just words. It would also give Canada more power in limiting the group's activities in this country, including the power to freeze bank accounts and the power to arrest and charge anyone in Canada who provides the group financial or material support. The United States declared the Houthis a global terror group in January, but Canada is still investigating the possibility, which Pierre Poilievre says is just one failure in a list of failures associated with the Trudeau Liberals.
He has broken our borders. He's allowed repeat violent criminals to run free in our streets. He's allowed ISIS terrorists to come in through our immigration system, even after they were videotaped, cutting up human bodies in the Middle East as part of the ISIS organization. They come into Canada and he gives them citizenship in this country where they plot to carry out new terrorist attacks. Justin Trudeau is not worth the cost, crime, chaos, and he's not worth the risk of terrorism.
Now, this call about Houthis follows up another call this week from Poilievre to also have a pro-Palestinian group called Samadin added to the terrorist list as well. With more on this, we're now joined by our strategist panel, Susan Smith, principal and co-founder with Blue Sky Strategy Group. Jordan Paquet is a senior consultant with the same company. And Nasha Brownridge is a senior consultant with Strategy Corps. Hello to the three of you.
Hello, Michael.
Hello. So, we just heard Pierre Poilievre, and obviously he's not holding back his words when he's criticizing the Trudeau track record on security. I'm wondering, is security an area in which Liberals are vulnerable, Susan?
That's a good question, but I think one of the things it's important to point out and take a step back with Mr. Poilievre is one of the things he's refusing to do is get a security clearance so that he can operate on the basis of fact. And he's out doing press conferences using extreme language without ever having the actual benefit of a proper security briefing and really committing to understanding what the process is. And I think he's vulnerable there. I think there are issues that regular, ordinary Canadians who don't understand the security process, but who are not Prime Minister or seeking to be Prime Minister, don't understand too. I think there's some face value things that the Liberals could probably communicate better on, but I think it's irresponsible of Mr. Poilievre to make grand, kind of really inflammatory, really divisive statements without, at the same time that he's refusing to get a security clearance that someone who wants to...
the documents around foreign interference, to be clear,
but
not
on other things too, right? But he would, in that case, he would understand what happens when you make these kinds of designations. I don't think anybody in Canada wants Canadian government to have a knee-jerk reaction exactly the same as the U.S. on things. We need to do our own homework, make our own determinations. I hope the government does those things in a responsible, reasonable way. I trust that that's what's taking place, and Mr. Poilievre is making politics out of something that's national security.
Yeah, Jordan?
No, I mean, look, this is an extremely vulnerable issue for the Liberals, and it's an issue that the Conservatives have been strong on for a long time, including in government. there needs to be political leadership right now. We can't just look at the department and say, okay, no, we can't name certain groups as terrorist organizations because we have to wait for the bureaucracy to catch up. Violent crimes are up so much in this country right now since October 7th, and there's communities that are hurting in the Jewish community, as the Muslim community, lots of communities right now. So they're looking for political leadership and for strong words to be said about this. Liberal caucus members, Anthony Housefather, has been very forceful as well, pushing the government along on some of these issues. And so I think Poilievre's just really amplifying the voice of some of these communities that have felt like they're put down. I don't think it's a matter of just getting a security clearance from government to kind of talk about these behind closed doors. These are issues that Canadians are feeling everywhere and very strongly about, and they should be debated quite openly.
Nasha?
See, and I think when it comes to leadership, words are just words. The government does have to make an informed decision on these matters. National security and public safety are no joke. It's something that you have to take very cautiously and very carefully. So I do respect that the government is in a difficult position when it comes to these things. And I do think that Pierre Poilievre is playing games. He's been doing that a lot this session, wanting to call an election every other day. And now I think he's taking some of that rhetoric and moving it into a space where it doesn't belong.
Okay, well, I'm going to pick up a bit of what you said there because, we've heard a few comments from Mr. Poilievre this week, among them, beginning of the week, accusing the Foreign Affairs Minister of pandering to Hamas. He also said, in marking the anniversary of October 7th, that striking Iranian nuclear sites by Israel would be a blessing for the world. I want to play in particular right now what we heard from Mélanie Joly based on what was said to her about Hamas. Take a listen to the Foreign Affairs Minister.
We don't freaking gaslight people. Not on a day that is so important for the country. And clearly that's what Pierre Poilievre was doing today. And clearly what he was saying, he was trying to play petty politics on the backs of victims. And so that's why not only should he apologize for what he did, but clearly the guy's unfit to become prime minister.
Okay, so that was Monday, the anniversary of October 7th, but it was reacting to this comment made by Pierre Poilievre. It makes me wonder, with all the criticisms hurled at today, are Liberals answering these criticisms effectively enough, Susan, to perhaps put at ease any doubts Canadians may have as a result of these types of criticisms?
What's the maddest I've ever seen Mélanie Joly? She was clearly furious and genuinely furious. But Michael, you just read something really benignly, and just because you're neutral, but Pierre Poilievre called for attacks on nuclear facilities. If you're the leader of a country in the free world, do you want to be calling on things that start nuclear war? So these, or could start nuclear war. These kinds of flippant, I don't know if they're flippant, they're deliberately, the statements from Mr. Poilievre are dangerous. That's a dangerous statement. I don't care what your politics are. When you say go ahead and go after nuclear capabilities, that's a dangerous statement in an overheated environment. And Mr. Poilievre, in terms of his comments in the House, has been sanctioned by the Speaker of the House of Commons. There was a Liberal MP that said something about, I think, Conservative MPs, and he had the same sanctions put on, and the Conservatives went bananas against Mr. Poilievre, and he wasn't allowed to speak for a while. The same thing happened when Mr. Poilievre made the comments about Mélanie Joly, and the Speaker said, you have to respect the decorum of the House. So the challenge for Mr. Poilievre is to respect the decorum of the House, to demonstrate himself as a leader, and on both those counts this week, I think he's failed.
Jordan?
I mean, the rhetoric in the House on some of these issues has been high for a long time. The Liberals, it wasn't that long ago, were accusing the Conservatives of being tied up with Vladimir Putin in that side of the war. So I mean, it can't just be one or the other. I mean, we have to call it all out. So on a particular situation like this, I don't think Israel's going to go out and strike or risk a strike nuclear facilities because the leader of the opposition in Canada said so. These are debates that people are talking about right now. The Liberals are really backed into a corner on this issue because they've tried to play too many sides of it, and they've tried to make domestic politics and tried to solve domestic problems with it. So they're in a situation right now where some of these conversations are getting more heated and more difficult, and I think they've really walked themselves into it.
There's nothing Mr. Poilievre says that isn't about playing into domestic politics. The difference with the Liberals and Mr. Poilievre at the moment is Prime Minister Trudeau has a seat at the tables around the world. He's got a voice at the UN and other places, and he's not saying that he supports a strike on nuclear facilities. And Mr. Poilievre wants the job Mr. Trudeau has, and he's calling for that kind of thing, and I think that's irresponsible.
Okay, Nasha?
Pierre Poilievre has always been the attack dog in the House of Commons, but when it comes to issues like this, like, they are so sensitive, and not to mention there are innocent lives at play here. These conflicts have been going on long before Justin Trudeau was even Prime Minister, and to play again these political games and to be so almost deliberately, I mean, not caring about these situations. I'm sorry, but I'm at a loss for words. I think our Canadians deserve better, and our House of Commons deserves better.
Okay, quickly running out of time, so I'm going to ask for a quick 30-second answer from. Actually, did you want to jump in for something?
Sure. I mean, like, look, there's communities out there that are.
Jordan was like,
no, I was trying to be polite, but look, there's communities hurting out there right now, and some of these have just become a matter of domestic politics for the Liberals. Agreed. Yes, the Prime Minister does have a role on the world stage, but they also look to Canada for leadership on these issues, especially standing up for Israel, calling loudly for its right to exist, right to defend itself. But they've been trying to get in too deep on some of these motions that have been pushed by the more radical sides of the NDP. And it's just hurting them in the long run and just causing some of these divisions.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, feel free to react. Okay, Susan, Nasha, and then that's it.
I think there's no place to speak so casually about nuclear war or any type of war or arms, and I think that's what really leaves me lost for words, is how casually that was done.
And there's no question that the Government of Canada, led by the Liberals, but the Government of Canada always stands up for the right for Israel to exist.
Okay, well, that is our time. That went by much faster than I anticipated. But Jordan, it's all because of you. Susan, Jordan, Nasha, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. A rally was held on the Hill in support of a Bloc Québécois private members bill. Bill C-282 would protect Canada's supply management regime in future trade negotiations. Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet spoke at the rally along with Liberal ministers and MPs from the NDP and the Greens. C-282 is one of two bills Blanchet has demanded become law by October 29 if the government wishes to retain Bloc support on confidence matters. A new report from StatsCan is shedding new light on wealth in this country. According to the agency, income inequality is at its highest level since 1999. More than two-thirds of Canada's total net worth is now held by the top 20%. One of the driving factors for this disparity is high interest rates, something that can benefit Canadians with more assets, while mortgage debt contributed to lower net worths for less wealthy households. Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly testified before the public inquiry into foreign interference today. Joly outlining the events leading to a Chinese diplomat being declared persona non grata last year. The diplomat expelled from Canada for allegedly targeting MP Michael Chong and his family. Also testifying today, the former Public Safety Minister and current MP Marco Mendicino. The Prime Minister is scheduled to appear before the Commission on Wednesday, the last day of public hearings. Currently, Justin Trudeau is in Laos meeting with the leaders of the ASEAN group. Meanwhile, the Parliamentary Committee on National Security and Intelligence says it will review the role of the Prime Minister's advisor on the matters. NSICOP says the National Security and Intelligence Advisor is one of the most senior officials in Ottawa, but its authority and governance has not been subjected to external review. Based on their work, NSICOP says it may make recommendations about the role, the announcement coming a day after the current security advisor criticized NSICOP at the Hague Commission. She told the inquiry she is uncomfortable with the impression of treason created by an NSICOP report on foreign interference. We are now just 25 days away from Election Day in the United States. Advanced polling has begun in many states already, but how those votes break down, how the Electoral College comes together, will all be revealed in a few short weeks. And perhaps not surprisingly, new reporting this week shows both parties have spent the most money in the handful of swing states that are expected to decide the winner. The New York Times reporting that Pennsylvania has seen the most campaign dollars, Democrats investing $170 million so far in that contest, Republicans investing $160 million. Meanwhile, we have some new polling numbers on those swing states. It comes to us from Emerson College Polling and media company The Hill. And to talk about it, we're now joined by the Senior Director of Emerson College Polling, Matt Taglia. Matt, good to see you again. Thank you for being here.
Good to see you. Thanks so much.
Listen, before we get into the numbers here, let's lay some groundwork. You know, for Canadians who are watching the race on this side of the border, why are these swing states the primary targets for both campaigns, and why especially Pennsylvania?
Right. So, not only were these swing states among some of the closest in the 2020 election and in some cases the 2016 election, but because of the Electoral College, the U.S. does not elect its president based on a popular vote. So, because of that Electoral College, each state is allocated a certain number of electoral votes in a winner-take-all system. So, the winner has to get to 270. And that pathway can take a few different routes through different states. But at the end of the day, Pennsylvania is one of those states. And it has 19 electoral college votes. The closest next in the swing states are Georgia and North Carolina, both with 16 votes. Pennsylvania was one of those states that determined the election in both 2016 and 2020. Trump winning it in 2016, and then President Biden winning in 2020.
So a state with a good number of electoral college seats, as well as the fact that it is very close right now. We're now 25 days before Election Day. According to your numbers, things are still very tight. Break down Pennsylvania for us. We saw a bit of a glimpse of it, but give us a bit more of a breakdown, if you will.
Sure, and things have not moved all that much in Pennsylvania since we last polled it in September. We still see that former President Trump leads by 1 point, 49 to 48. And we ask undecided voters what we call the push. We ask them if they had to decide today, who would they choose? And after we ask them that, it's the same. Trump still leads by a point with 50%. So, while the top line numbers there have not really changed, we do see that, overall, I would say that this is good news for Trump if I'm the Trump campaign. But, looking at some of these demographics, we see that Vice President Harris actually wins independent voters, these voters who say they aren't Democrats and they aren't Republicans. We also see that she's winning female voters, but it's not necessarily an overwhelming win, 54% overall. She's also winning voters in their 30s. So, these folks who may be thinking about buying a home soon, but are also feeling the effects of inflation, she's winning those folks, but not by the sort of margin that we would necessarily expect for a Democratic candidate, and not necessarily by the margin that we saw in 2020 with President Biden.
Okay, so I hear from that slight leads rather than a decisive victory so far. Has there been any state that, when you look at it, that perhaps one candidate has hit the ceiling, which might give the other candidate an opportunity? So
I think two states we see, I'm not sure that I'd call it a ceiling, but I would be surprised to see significant movement in Nevada and Arizona in the next couple weeks in the polls. So in Nevada, Harris now leads by 1 point. We've seen a fairly consistent lead for Harris there. And in Arizona, we've also seen a fairly consistent lead for former President Trump. So again, I wouldn't necessarily call these ceilings, but I would not necessarily expect to see Harris receive over, say, 48% in the next few weeks in the polls in Arizona, and likewise for former President Trump in Nevada.
Okay, so again, when we look at your new polling numbers out today, the top line of this is things remain tight with just a few weeks left in the campaign, 25 days to be exact. So what will you be watching out for between now and Election Day in the U.S.?
So one thing that we typically look for, and we will especially be looking at closely in these final few weeks, are independent voters. So these folks who are neither Democrat nor Republican, they usually have some sort of lean, but there are some out there who are truly independent and don't have a party affiliation. We're going to be tracking them, looking at where they go. Right now, we've seen over the past few weeks that Vice President Harris has been doing well with independents, but not to an extent to overcome some of the leads that former President Trump has posted in some of these states. Again, all of these states are within the margin of error. So, either candidate could win any of these states. But that is one thing that can give us an idea of what the trend will look like. We're also going to be taking a look at younger voters. Younger voters have been difficult to pin down this election cycle in polling. When President Biden was at the top of the ticket, it looked very odd. We saw younger voters breaking for Trump in higher numbers than we ever anticipated. And now we've seen that trend reversed. We see these voters who are roughly under the age of 30 now breaking for Vice President Harris. But we need to see if that trend continues and if she increases that vote, because that's going to be crucial come Election Day, as she can size up all of these voting blocks that would traditionally go towards the Democratic Party.
Okay. Keeping an eye out for independents as well as the youth vote. Matt Taglia, really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, last week I had a chance to sit down with Lloyd Axworthy here in Ottawa, a feature interview that CPAC will air in the coming weeks for my program Profile. Now, the occasion is Mr. Axworthy's memoir, set to be released next Tuesday. It is titled Lloyd Axworthy, My Life in Politics, and the book does look back at Mr. Axworthy's early life in Winnipeg, his time at Princeton, and his decision to enter politics. It also explores key moments in the country's history, including the patriation of the Constitution and the signing of the International Landmine Treaty. But the book is also part prescription, as Lloyd Axworthy shares his thoughts on what he thinks will make this country better, and that includes a constitutional recognition of Indigenous Canadians as a founding people in this country, equal to the French and the English. It's an idea known as the third pillar of governance.
I was really fortunate in that journey you talked about. I got to know somebody like Phil Fontaine. We went canoeing together, along with Jim Carr, who's a dear friend who just passed away a year ago. I describe in the book how we went to a sweat lodge with Phil in one of the Indigenous communities outside Winnipeg. When he talked about the impact of being a residential school survivor, I had never heard of it. I mean, I was a reasonably well-informed Canadian, but Phil then became certainly a mentor, and that over the years I learned from it. And just in the mid-20s, we were working together in Winnipeg on a reconciliation project. It was one of the major Indigenous organizations purchased the Hudson Bay Company a building to sort of convert it into a downtown center. So I had a chance to really kind of talk to Phil off and on, and I came away with this proposition that he and his partner Kathleen Mahoney, who's a constitutional lawyer from the University of Calgary, they went to the Senate of Canada in 2015 and said, we cannot be the country we should be if we're living on a lie. And that means that the decision back in 1867 to omit Indigenous people as part of the founding communities of Canada was a huge transgression. I mean, it was a lie to begin with. Who better helped found this country? But we paid a huge price since then, because it really said that Indigenous people are second-class citizens, and we have ministries who are, make decisions for them. The whole idea, and I think the idea of starting a major deliberation across Canada amongst Canadians could be one of those defining moments I talked about, where we say, by incorporating and understanding that Indigenous people are a founding nation and that have to be treated as such, it's going to change our law, it's going to change our foreign policy, it's going to change our economic development. It's got all kinds of implications that make us a much better and a more whole, complete country than we are right now.
And to that, you say that Canadians will benefit from this, not just Indigenous Canadians, but all Canadians, because there are lessons to be learned, including lessons from the Haudenosaunee Nation. Right. Talk to us about what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, the Iroquois Confederacy, way back, had established a basic principle of the seventh generation, and every decision you made in your tribal councils and had to consider the impact it had 7 generations forward. Michael, think of what that would do if that became a much stronger ethic in our own country and our governance. Everything we do is to say what sustainability also then becomes a major factor. We can't make decisions that are going to sort of undermine and destroy the world we have, the privileges we have. And so that whole idea of thinking ahead, talking about not just your children, your grandchildren, but people 7 generations away, I think it begins to, and you start teaching that in the schools, and you start talking about it in your business decisions, and you start looking about it not politically, but also in the legal system. All these things that begin to happen. It's one example, I think, of the kind of philosophy, the ethic in Indigenous governance could be a great sort of refreshment in our own system.
So you point to lessons, you point to changing the way things are done by acknowledging Indigenous nations as the founding nations of this country, not just English and French. But are you worried that that might be divisive, though? Because the history of constitutions and negotiations around them, and I don't have to tell you this, is divisive in this country.
Sure.
Because it took decades to come up with the Constitution Act of 1982. Meech Lake failed, Charlottetown failed, and there was a very negative impact in terms of national unity as a result.
There's no question that it would be provocative, but I think, frankly, my view is that I think Canada's ready for a little kick in the pants. I think we've become too sort of comfortable in the niches, in the sort of ruts that we're in. It's time that we sort of there's been periods in the history of this country where Canadians have made important decisions. It wasn't just the Charter and the Constitution was one, but the participation in the Second World War, where we identified who we were as Canadians, the building of a national railway, the ability to sort of develop part of the Pearsonian years where who were we? And so he established a flag. We established sort of anthems. The maple leaf became a symbol. We began to identify that we never had before. So it's a risk worth taking, but I try to argue in the book that it's up to non-Indigenous Canadians now to respond. Indigenous Canadians right now are working all in various forms and efforts to try to make those changes. And it's amazing what's going on at the community level, the regional level, and then the national level. But the non-Indigenous community, we have to start responding more effectively. We simply can't tinker on the edges and say, okay, we're going to provide some more money here and we're going to have a court case here. We have to come back to the fundamental. The right of a founding community is to have its right respected, its laws respected, its sense of governance, its science, its culture.
And that was just part of my conversation with Lloyd Axworthy. The memoir, Lloyd Axworthy, My Life in Politics, is out on Tuesday. The full 30-minute interview will air in an upcoming episode of Profile here on CPAC. Well, that is Primetime Politics for this Thursday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow. Until then, take care.